Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Cultural and Creative Studies Q&A. My name is Misty Jones Simpson. I'm an assistant professor in audio production at Middle Tennessee State University. Today, I am co-moderating with Dr. Monika Herzig from Indiana University. And I just want to welcome all of our presenters. I think I see everyone here. We do have to be a bit efficient today. We have about 10 minutes per presentation. And so I'd love to just get started. I'd actually love to get started with Dr. Morgan Bryant and Dr. Eric Holt, who I see are here today. Their presentation is titled The Crossover, Evaluating Mainstream Consumption of Urban Music Concerts. Eric is an assistant professor of music business at Belmont. He's also the CEO of Chimenous Enterprises. And Morgan is an assistant professor in the marketing department at St. Joseph's University. So welcome this morning. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I want to kick us off. We'll wait to get some questions in, but I wanted to kick us off this morning after viewing your presentation. What do you hope is the immediate impact from your research, not only for the market, but for the classroom and for your students?
Go ahead, Doc.
So I really like for immediate impact for classes. One of the things that really struck me when we got into the data collection for this project was the wealth of data that was available. So I tend to teach marketing research methods, marketing analytics, and I like to bring in entertainment aspects when I can. I also advise for our entertainment marketing major, and I try to bring that into the mainstream marketing major and courses as much as I can. So one of the things that I intend to have an immediate impact in my class with is to start using data sets like this to teach with as teaching tools, to teach students how to go through data, how to analyze it, how to draw insights, recognizing that some of the insights that will be coming out of some of the data this way can have some social implications. We have a lot of opportunity to teach what we call service learning courses or courses with ethics and diversity overlays at St. Joe's. And so I really think that the data set and some of the things that we've been able to uncover during our research really lend themselves well to designing a course in that way. And so that's one of the immediate impacts, and also just bringing light to some of these types of things in the classroom. And so sometimes the student has to actually get into a sociology class or a class on gender or a class on racial or ethnic diversity in order to uncover things that happen in sort of regular everyday life and consumption. And so I like bringing things like this that I know students can relate to. I like to teach using playlists and streaming and concert type things. So this, I really think that the research that we're uncovering really allows us to bring some of that into our applied pedagogy in the classroom that really can connect with the students in a real way. So that's one of the things that I took away from it in terms of, how do I really start to immediately see some way to use this beyond just a research vehicle.
Wonderful.
And
Monika, I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Holt.
Similar to Dr. Morgan, I'm on the live music side. I teach venue management, concert promotions. And one of the things that this research will also help is update the information as far as what's happening, because most of the trends that we're looking at are real-time trends, like literally 1 to 2 years ago, and they're shifting the live entertainment space in a way that it hasn't been before. So that's very interesting as well.
That's wonderful. Monika, do we have any questions coming in yet?
Not yet, but, actually, I'm curious on your study. Crossover is a major driver for any genre to become larger. And we see this momentum and not being able to tour and not being able to do that right now. Do you think we might have stopped this momentum for especially this case right now, or what's your take?
Is that for us? That's for us. Yes. What's happening with COVID, because you can't have live shows, you still have an increase in streaming consumption. And so the trend of streaming consumption that was happening pre-COVID was that the consumption of Black music and culture was on its at the highest it's ever been. There has been some data since COVID has happened that other genres like country and rock, which have lagged behind in streaming consumption, have increased some because everyone's at home. But the numbers that we have so far, Black music is still the most consumed music during the COVID as well.
Wonderful. I did have another question. In your notes for future research, you mentioned looking at popularity variables, things like streaming activity, search activity. Do you think social media could play a role as well? Would that be kind of hard to wrangle?
No, absolutely. Social media plays a huge role. So that's one of my areas of specialty in going in and mining and looking at conversations, hashtags, popularity of things. So quite honestly, some of the streaming platforms that we've identified in the future research are actually considered traditional, or they're actually considered social media mechanisms. So you have a profile, you can like, you can share, you can communicate. And so that makes it social media. So actually social media that's skewed towards sharing music, video, image files is actually quite relevant to what we're going to be looking at moving forward. So in all honesty, we had planned to start the project in that way, and having the poll-star data that we were collecting just be a variable, and have our data structured, our methodology structured in a way that would factor in the popularity data from the beginning. What happened was the poll-star data was so rich that there were so many different things that we could unpack, uncover, and take a look at, that we decided that there's more than one research project here. And so we can kind of uncover what we see with the current data set, just looking at all that comes out of that poll-star data to begin with. And then our follow-on will really take a look to say, now, how do we drill down to the other side of the equation and look at some of the popularity drivers that could be influencing the trends and the behaviors that we're seeing on the consumption from concert ticket sales. So that's kind of where we went with that as we got into the data.
Really interesting. Monika, we have time for maybe one more question. I've got some more if you don't have anything on your end.
I think we should get through all the different presenters that might trigger some coming in, and then we'll go back with some. So
okay, we can
maybe
do that.
Fabiana is next because she has babysitter issues. She told me.
Okay. We could do that. I'll be happy to introduce Dr. Fabiana Cloray. Her presentation is titled "The Musician's Profit Umbrella and Women Musician Entrepreneurs." She is the Director of Music Business and Entrepreneurship at University of North Texas, is also the co-founder and Executive Director of Superior Academy of Music in Miami, Florida. Good morning, Dr. Cloray.
Good morning.
I know we want to get right. Good morning. I know we want to get right into it. And I know Monika had a lead on some of these questions. So Monika, I'd be glad to defer to you if you'd like to kick us off.
Why don't you summarize, for everybody listening, what you're working on, and then obviously me being the big advocate for women in jazz and empowering. And, Misty, we should point that out as one of the few, but the first woman for Pro Tools specialist. You can explain it yourself, but meaning one of the forerunners in production also. So Fabiana, how do you empower us?
Well, I really feel that the best way is by modeling whatever I teach. It's by just not only sharing what I understand from my experience, but to actually try to live it myself and align my own life and my own profession and my own just overall sense of balance, so that allows me to inspire others to do the same. So that's, in a nutshell, the key ways that I really try to put myself in a framework and encourage my clients and my students to do it the same way. In other words, we can't really make the change happen unless we become it ourselves. So I've really learned that, and I believe in it very, very powerfully.
Wonderful. Do we have it? I've got some questions. Monika, do you have any on your end from any of our viewers? All righty. One of my questions is you mentioned you have several different professional sides of your identity. You're a pianist, you're a professor, you're the school that you run, your coaching program. You have a lot that you're doing. How important do you think it is to diversify your professional identity? Is it important these days for survival to do so?
Well, I actually like to see it as not necessarily diversifying, but actually uniting the different elements of your identity. I think, the strength comes from the union. And by understanding that everything we do has a reason for why we went into it. And obviously there are things we may enjoy more than others, but I think it can be to our advantage to create a unified sense of identity based on all the different aspects of what we do and our background. And I think when we try to partition them and do them separately, we actually lose power and we lose opportunities. So this is why I've named my framework, the Musician's Profit Umbrella, because it's really about combining and putting everything together and creating a cohesive brand identity based on the different aspects of our strengths, and both on the personal and professional side.
Wonderful. Monika, any more questions on your end?
Well, I was just curious. I mean, I love the idea of the umbrella, and the way to counsel students or professionals. I mean, there's two aspects that you need to combine, right? To look at the individual person. What is your needs? How can we put your little package together? And then also as a counselor, you have to, I guess, have some steps ready on how you put that package together. And I'm just curious what your balance is in terms of individualization and having like this manual. This is how you create your umbrella that possibly is something, that all of us can be using and employing and furthering.
Absolutely. So basically, my framework has 6 basic pillars, okay? And this is something that is obviously nuanced depending on the individual circumstance and particular traits of the person that I'm working with. But essentially, the process is this way. The first step is to really focus on the mindset aspect, the internal work, right? Helping the person understand what their assumptions are about their current reality, what their vision is for their future reality, what they would love to happen in their lives, and kind of making this all about removing any sort of limiting beliefs. The second process is going through clarity of vision and thought leadership creation. In other words, helping them figure out what is it that they really want to do that would align with what they say is important in their lives. It's kind of keeping that integrity check where their thoughts match their words and their words match their actions. So if they say they want to experience a certain type of professional life and routine and schedule, then it's to help them understand what would that mean for their lives and how could they actually make that a reality, like an actionable plan, right? The third process is understanding the awareness of your field. Like, where are you right now in your industry? Researching, listening to your intended clients, right? And figuring out, okay, you have this vision, you have this understanding, you've clarified your mindset, you've removed any limiting beliefs, but now where does this stand in the world and how relevant is it and how do people value it? And so it's putting yourself almost like a sponge, understanding like unless you listen and research where you are and what people need, it'll be very hard for you to match your offer with what people want. So the fourth step is actually designing an offer, right? It's figuring out, now that you've listened and you've understood what is needed in your industry and what you can do about those needs, how you could solve a problem, then it's about designing an actual solution for that problem, right? Figuring out, okay, how do I go about creating a service-based offer, a product-based offer, a combination of the two, and really design something that's going to provide both a solution, but also it's going to give me a financial engine to be able to truly pursue the things that I want, to do it in a way that is not going to take all of my time, but instead will allow me to win back my time, will help me be more efficient in my endeavors. The fifth step is now becoming visible, promoting this offer, right? Connecting it with your community, letting people realize that this is something in the world that is alive, that is available to them, creating the container for people to step into your world, right? Without imposing, but instead almost like putting a bat signal to the world and letting people see you and have that visibility. And then the sixth step is actually delivering the service, delivering the offer, delivering the product, but doing it from a place of constant experimentation. In other words, not making it a fixed process, but being willing to go back to the drawing board constantly and implement changes and modifications based on the response from the people you're serving. And the key part in this final step is to not fall into the perfectionistic behaviors that most musicians have, which is to wait until you're absolutely ready, that is absolutely not going to fail before you put it out there, but instead to embrace this more with like a game mentality and a playful mentality to say, let me just see how this goes, and be willing to experiment in the real world. So that's in a nutshell, kind of like the 6 pillars of my framework.
Wonderful. Before we go, where can we find out more information about your musician entrepreneur business coaching program?
Sure. You can visit my website at fabianacloray.com, and I've got all my information there. I've got a free training that you can check it out, and lots of resources, a media library with full of additional sources of information. So I'm happy to connect with you. I also have a Facebook group called Entrepreneurial Musician Mothers that you could join. And I work, through my page, through my community. I work with women and men, in all realms in all parts of their lives. So I welcome you to join me on my website.
Wonderful. We'll keep moderating questions, and if we have time here at the end, obviously for all of our presenters, we will pose some more here if we've got some more time. I would like to move on. I'm excited to introduce one of my colleagues, Michelle Conceison. Her presentation is entitled Measuring Folk, Audience Research Initiative 2018-2019. Michelle is an assistant professor at Middle Tennessee State University, where she teaches artist management, concert promotion, among other things. She also runs a management and marketing company called Market Monkeys. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, Misty. Thank you.
How you doing?
Good to see you.
Good to see you. I know, it's good to see you too. Listen, I know we're going to monitor some questions coming in. I had one kind of leading off for you here. You mentioned that in your research that several members of the folk community have secondary roles.
Yes.
I found that interesting information. Yeah. Do you find this to be true more of the older generation that's trying to survive in the industry, or do you think it's across the board?
That's a good question. And honestly, it's somewhat across the board, though. I think you see that people longer time in the business have more time to develop skills in alternate professions. I think Fabiana's research, speaks to that as well, of people who are wearing multiple hats. And in folk, we really always thought, it came up most because you'd go to conferences, and if you run music industry conferences, people want to have things on their badge that tell you who they are. And we would run into this issue every year. In fact, if you go to a folk music conference, there's regional ones and there's an international one. People will have ribbons. Like in the folk, it became a cultural thing to have ribbons for everything that you do. And that was just a joke. We just sort of were like, it's who can have the most ribbons and the things that they do in music. And you'd see, presenter, and you'd see folk DJ, and you'd see artist, and you'd see, but when we did the research, it really bared out that actually was a norm, and at least a norm in the folk field. So this research, the initial research, was done internally focused, looking at the industry and extended community that is part of, the more professional side. The future research is intended to be more audience facing. So it would be interesting to see, how that plays out. But I've started to want to ask that question in other circles that I operate in music, just to see kind of, is it different in folk compared to other genres or not?
Interesting. Monika, do we have any questions coming in?
I have the feeling everybody went for lunch after the after the talk. They are very quiet out there. I know there's 32 of them watching, so I'm encouraging everybody to throw out a few more questions. But maybe some of the issues is also the homework that you had to watch the video before. So let's chat a little bit more about your project, and maybe that'll entice them. So I was curious. It seems the folk community is a lot like the jazz community. You're just a little niche genre, and the economics are terrible, and everybody needs a second job. Otherwise, you can't make it work. So in there, I see a lot of similarities. So you came up, there was some myths that you wanted to overcome with that research, the myths about folk music. I was curious, the process of how you came up with the questions, and B, what the goal is in uncovering those myths. What are you trying to change about the situation or the music or the economics?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think I would say too, one of the myths was, is folk small? If folk is the music of the people, and it's a very expansive, there's an expansive definition of that genre. I mean, there are many people, including myself, that believe that hip hop is a folk music because it is speaking voice of the people. And I think that there are other genres like that. So what's interesting is I think the question really came to me in part because in my marketing of recordings class, I teach the students about the long tail and the concept that, smaller units of many titles could add up to as much as a hit. And it's long been my question in folk music of, the folk music community is pretty resistant to authority. It's interesting to listen to our previous keynote speaker, because we're talking about the big industry. And that industry is exactly who the folk community does not trust, and I think for that reason, for a long time, folk music has not been counted. In recent years, it's become easier for independent artists to be counted in SoundScan reporting. It's become less of needing to know how to program binary code and more ability to get an app that, at Venue will allow any independent artist to be counted. And so you're starting to see folk artists of the new era wanting to be counted. And so one of the big myths is folk small? If it's never been measured adequately, how do we know how small it is? I will say, Monika, to directly answer your question, we had a very big brainstorming session where 21 plus board members convened in California. We got into working sessions and we brainstormed all the ways that data could help different parts of the industry. So we each took a different field or stakeholder in our community and everyone brainstormed what are the questions that these different stakeholders might have. That was probably the biggest kind of developing. All the myth questions came up from there. And then the committee that worked on this, we really drilled down into about 7 questions that we posed in the RFP process. And then through the RFP process and choosing a research partner, with that research partner, we honed down even further to the ones you saw in my presentation. But I'd love to debunk all the myths.
That's awesome. I've got another question. Your guest in your video, I believe he was from Folk Alliance, mentioned community and connection being really important core values to folk. This is a bit of a rabbit trail, but I'm interested in your opinion. That being said, do you think the pandemic has threatened those values with things being so limited to streaming and this kind of community?
What you're seeing in the folk community is just rampant streaming and all kinds of different methods of connection. We've just come off this week, at the same time as MEIEA was the International Bluegrass Music Association's convention, which has happened virtually. The Americana Music Association had Thriving Roots, which happened virtually. If anything, I'm seeing in all of these are folk-related genres and community people. In all of these, I'm seeing much more striving to keep that connection, striving to have unique ways. Folk Alliance has been doing amped up their webinars and community meetings. They've created a program called Committing to Conversation as part of their efforts toward cultural equity and social justice. There's no, I'm seeing folk is like they are streaming, they are Zooming, they are Patreoning, they are connecting with fans. The band I work with is having cocktail parties every Thursday evening with certain patrons and their Patreon. Like, they are seeing that connection as the way to help their fans through this time. Most artists in the folk scene that I'm in touch with are really seeing themselves as being of service in this time. I know people are worried for artists' livelihood. They're worried for the industry's ability to make it through this challenge. But what I'm seeing is an outpouring of connection, which is very typical. We have been doing some focus groups with Folk Alliance. I'm still working with their research activities, and we're still hoping we can do phase 2 of this study. Though I think the COVID, we've needed a pause on the trajectory of this specific study because it would be very, very skewed by the current environment. But we've been doing focus groups in order to determine what programming should be for their conference in February. And the focus groups are bearing out the same theme of that community and connection and discovery, and that is the most important thing to the people in the community.
Great. Before we move on, do you have any quick advice for any folks wanting to do similar research in different genres? I mean, this was a bear of a project.
It was a bear of a project in some ways because we've tried to structure it in ways that it could be repeated. Our hope is in this next phase to actually develop guidelines such that other genres and more people in our field could take the way we're collecting the data to add to the data. So my advice, patience, persistence, and maybe accepting that the first phase, I mean, this initial data, maybe it's just because I'm in folk, some of it is not that novel in terms of our findings. We're confirming things we thought we knew, but it sets a framework for our next phases and a credibility that would allow us to ask a lot more probing questions. And honestly, just we needed to get our own chops together in terms of our board of directors and our staff and our research committee and myself. Like, we need to make sure we could do credible research before hanging it all out there, I guess. And I mean, something that Morgan said earlier about, there's more than one research project here. I think you can imagine there's more than one research project in the questions that we're asking. And that's a big challenge for us, is how do we prioritize, especially now? Is the audience research as important as the economic research we need to do at this moment? And at the end of my presentation, I share kind of the next things we need to study. And with COVID, maybe the economic piece is where we need to turn our attention to. But how we make those choices are really hard. And I am interested in hearing Dr. Bryant's and Eric Holt's kind of how you had to make some of those choices yourselves, because I think I could learn a lot from you.
That's a really great question, Michelle. I think some of it was naturally occurring in the data. So one of the things that we quickly figured out was we had a natural experiment. Our original dates for collecting, we were earlier. We started in 2008. We wanted at least a 10-year run out so that we could see sort of an evolution of trend. And then we realized concerts pretty much dried up in Q1 2020, which means that if we pulled a full year of data through the end of 2019, we had a very clear stop where this could be phase 1 looking at this dynamic pre-COVID, and there could be an easy phase 2 looking at all of this same data and the dynamics post-COVID. So some of it was just very circumstantial based on what was borne out. Some of it, I have to say, was kind of based on just doing a quick scan and seeing what kind of calls are out there for journals. So the other hat that I'm looking at is I'm junior faculty. I'm trying to pull together, as it is Eric, we're trying to pull together tenure dossiers. We need multiple publications. Can I make this data set work for something more than just one paper? Well, you know what? There's two kind of calls that are really big right now. One, we're seeing a lot around race in the marketplace, race and consumption that are outside of traditional entertainment outlets, but are looking for things that are that are investigating this dynamic that we're looking at with our project. And another is exactly what you called out, Michelle, some economic implications from COVID. There's a lot of calls out right now, both entertainment and non-entertainment related, looking for projects that have to do with investigating and evaluating economic impacts of COVID. Why not give them one of the only entertainment related papers that they might get in that call, increasing our opportunity, our chances of possibly being successful with a revise and resubmit and things of that. So it really just became kind of circumstantial, kind of strategic, kind of looking at our portfolios going, I could use another article, could you? Right? And so kind of rethinking what we had in front of us through those lenses.
Sounds like lots of opportunities for future research, which is exciting. Thank you for chiming in. This is a great dialogue. I'd like to go ahead and move on. And again, we'll keep monitoring questions. If we've got time for other presenters at the end, we will certainly head back. But I'd love to, at this point, introduce Dr. Jason Lee Guthrie, who's with us today. His presentation is titled Literature, Lemonade, and Damn, a Historical Perspective on Popular Music Awards. Jason is an assistant professor of communication and media studies at Clayton State University. He's a media historian whose work explores the intersections of economics and creativity. Welcome, Dr. Guthrie.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a fun session to be in. My work, as you mentioned, is mostly historical, but one of the things I really enjoy about MEIEA is, meeting with everybody that is in the industry and does all these, really cool, like modern industry related things. I guess in some ways this project was an attempt to be able to do that. For me, looking at a modern phenomenon through a historical lens, I guess. I was just kind of vibing on the recent spate of acknowledgement of popular music in some of the more prestigious awards. Obviously the Grammys and VMAs and stuff like that have been around forever, but with the Nobel recognizing Dylan 4 years ago, and then in true Dylan style, he drug that out as long as possible. And then the Peabody Awards, which are actually housed at the University of Georgia, where I went to school, gave Beyonce a Peabody for Lemonade, I believe the same year. And then the Pulitzers, not to be outdone, the Pulitzers and the Peabodys kind of have this, today, a friendly rivalry, and throughout history, not always quite so friendly. But the Pulitzers awarded Kendrick Lamar's Damn. And I knew from my own experience as a student judge for the Peabodys that records exist on the judging for that. And then through a project that I did for the Pulitzer Centennial, that you can actually look at the records for the judging and see, at least some things about like how decisions were come to and how things were deliberated. Because I do think that there's an interesting thread, to that it's a cross-pollination of legitimacy, right? Like the popular musicians, like this is a way to get an extra level of legitimacy even above like your peers at the Grammys by getting recognized by something that is sort of above and outside your sphere. But it's also a way for those awards, right, to bring in popular culture and make themselves more relevant. And so one of the things, like as I kind of delved into this, I mentioned Dylan kind of, his just really, his own way of being theatrical about it. He knows exactly what he's doing, but it's like theatrical by abstinence, I guess, or by abstaining from participating, I guess. That part that kind of made the press coverage of it a zoo for quite some time. And then also the fact that the Nobels don't share their deliberation notes. Here, let me take off my glasses. I think it's giving a weird glare. That one makes it a little bit of an odd duck, I think, with the other two. I think it provides some important context. I think a better way to frame the study, if I really wanted to dig into it, might be to include LL Cool J getting the Kennedy Center honor and sort of look more at specifically American awards. And, something that I think, is very much part of the implicit message with Beyonce, Kendrick Lamar, and LL Cool J is these organizations, trying to honor a Black creativity in a moment, where we're doing Black Lives Matter in America and things like that. So I think that would actually be a better way to split this up. And I think that that the access to the records is important from a historical standpoint, but probably as much or more important, if I was going to turn this into a real paper, would be like a newspaper content analysis type study. A lot of the headline ways of framing these kinds of awards are unprecedented. This is precedent setting. This has never happened before. And kind of looking at the veracity of that. I mean, I can say in the scope of the Peabodys, that's more of a headline grab than it is a historical truth. I mean, the Peabodys have really focused on classical and jazz for the most part, but they have really gravitated towards things that are avant-garde and sort of groundbreaking. Yeah, so that was kind of what the thought was about, and if anybody has any questions or thoughts, I'd love to hear them.
Sure, Monica, do we have any questions coming in from our viewers?
We have a question. So the question was, look, my savvy here. I figured out how to put this on screen. So meaning, can you talk about the negative impact even of some of these awards on the artists, getting this recognition outside their field?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to look at it a little bit more. I mean, there was, I think there was a little bit of backlash. It's probably not even fair to call it backlash, but just, there can be criticisms can pop up. I think if I remember correctly, it would have been most relevant to the Pulitzers recognizing Kendrick Lamar. Some criticism of like, is this just like, for show, what's really going on here? Do they really care about hip hop, or is this just, like a traditional, 100-year-old, very well-funded awards organization, just making a play, to be relevant. But I don't really know about a whole lot of negatives. I know that, I think Kendrick Lamar, I want to say it was a Rolling Stone piece that came out after, but he kind of talked about a lot of this. And, he did experience, I think, some personal criticism as well. But that would be a really interesting part of the full paper for sure. So thank you for that question.
I was curious myself, in terms of looking even further in these unprecedented types of things, how these came about, the whole society surrounding. So obviously, if you have, for the first time a Kendrick Lamar, so what's going on in the culture and that, and who's on the panel? Is there something different and how that relationship?
There is, and I mean, that was the kind of historical aspect is the thinking about the way that like awards decisions are made and the way that they confirm legitimacy. Like I can speak to the Peabodys. I think the year I did it as a student judge, 2014, was like the very last year that they did it that way, and it was kind of a big deal because they like dramatically changed it. Like they used to use journalism students, and graduate students and faculty, at the University of Georgia, and then it would ultimately go to like a panel of industry experts who would pretty much override, like it was a little bit perfunctory. I mean, I know for sure, like our panel, our little subgroup was very strongly like against something that ultimately won, which hopefully I can say. But they've changed that now. They've also, the Peabodys have really focused on like, it's become much more of an event in the last couple of years with like a new director. So it's like broadcast on cable, and they try to get like the biggest stars possible. Like the year that I went, that was Breaking Bad's year. So like Bryan Cranston was the biggest star there. And he got annoyed because everybody was kind of like wanting to come up to him. I mean, it was like he wasn't being a celebrity, like it probably really was annoying. But that has been kind of part of like the Peabodys, like jockeying with the Pulitzers. The Pulitzers are kind of like more well known in journalism circles. So I think like when, you know, they went for Beyonce, gave Beyonce award. Beyonce did not come to the ceremony. I think it's like not quite high enough on Queen Bey's priority list. But they did actually were able to get Kendrick Lamar to come to the actual ceremony. You know, so that was like a huge photo op for the Pulitzers. So there are a lot of interesting dynamics there. I'm just sharing right now very much off of just like an initial analysis and kind of like, you know, I mean, I would have to go a lot deeper before I would like publish, you know, kind of what I'm sharing right now as findings. But these are the kinds of like contexts that would really inform deeper research on that. Yeah.
Great. Exciting work. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, thanks so much. It's an honor to be here.
Wonderful. I'd like to go ahead and move on and welcome Dr. Waleed Rashidi, whose presentation is titled Skip, Burn, Seek, and Scratch, Young Adults Compact Disc Usage Experiences in 2020. Waleed is an assistant professor in the Department of Communications at CSU Fullerton. He hosts a weekly jazz radio show and has freelanced for everyone from the LA Times to Alternative Press, E! Online. Welcome, Dr. Rashidi.
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I'd love to lead off. I loved your presentation. I'd love to lead off with a question. Did your research confirm any suspicions, or were you legitimately surprised at what you found?
There were a few surprises. Some of them had confirmed some of my initial suspicions, but I would say one of the surprises that maybe I just didn't really see coming was the fact that, and actually connecting it to this particular panel, this panel, of course, has the word culture in it. And one of the, I guess, surprises for me was the fact that K-pop culture had such a, perhaps such an influence in some of the CD sales that are out there. Some of the respondents that I received from this particular study had said that they are interested in K-pop, number one. And number two, through that interest, they purchase CDs because they want to build up their collection, but also because the CDs come with limited edition photo cards and all kinds of other things that they can get as part of that purchase. So I thought that was kind of an interesting finding just in and of itself, the idea of K-pop culture being connected to CD sales in 2020. And I actually was able to connect that with some news articles that kind of confirmed that as well, that yeah, K-pop culture has had kind of a hand in CD sales, which I think is interesting in the year 2020.
Yeah, extremely interesting. Monika, do we have any questions coming in?
So we don't have any questions yet, but maybe triggering some of things. So what you did, you asked those few young adults who happened to buy CDs why they did it, which I think was fascinating to me because, you know, as a jazz artist, you still hang on to these things and actually produce them. And every time you ask them, why are you investing those $10,000s of dollars? But in the end, there is a lot of need to it. And it was interesting, I thought, what they answered, you know, A, that the car, you need something in the car.
Yeah.
So by not having that, B, that to have it accessible when you don't have internet. I thought that was such an interesting answer. And then C, the physicality. But I didn't see in your presentation, at least, any answers on, well, there is something to this whole album as a unit. Do they still have a notion for that, or did we just lose that?
No, I think they still have a notion for that. I think the folks who want to purchase CDs, these young adults who want to purchase CDs, they are looking for that package. They want the tangibility of the product. Some of them said, I still enjoy the artwork. I still enjoy having lyrics. So that, I think, is important to them, having that kind of physical nature of being able to hold something and to interact with something. And, you know, their lives as they've grown up have been very file-based. You know, you got to keep in mind, if they are 18 years old, you know, they were born in the 2000s, and, you know, they're born in, you know, if we look at, of course, what was happening in the 2000s, especially in the early 2000s, we have the introduction of the iPod and iTunes and MP3s. So, you know, they grew up in a quite heavily file-based media environment. So for them to interact with CDs is kind of taking them back to maybe, you know, some of their initial forays with music, which maybe their parents were playing CDs for them or things of that nature. And some of them had talked about the fact that they use CDs to kind of reminisce, to take a walk down memory lane, to have that bookmark and that chapter in their lives when they were younger and when they used to interact with CDs. Some of them had talked about the idea of them having some favorite childhood CDs and soundtracks to some of their favorite childhood movies. So having that on CD kind of brings that whole perspective back. It's not just listening to it on their iPod or listening to it on a stream. It's actually being able to interact with the entirety of the product. Now, keep in mind, of course, I had surveyed folks who were specifically young adults who were specifically had purchased and played a new CD in the past year. So, you know, this is a pretty distinct subset when we think about that. But at the same time, I do believe that, you know, these folks, some of them at least, are quite interested in still using CDs. There is a portion of them that did say, well, I just got the CD because it was bundled with something else that I wanted. I wanted the concert tickets, it came with the CD. I really wanted the merchandise, and it came bundled as part of that package. So I definitely had some of those responses as well, who said, well, you know, I just got the CD because it was just part of the deal. But yeah, there were a few that, you know, did say, hey, I'm still interested in playing CDs, and I'm still interested in the tangibility of it as well.
Interesting.
Well, we did have a question.
Oh, go for it.
We did have a question come in, and I wanted to ask the same thing. So
okay.
That is perfect. So the question being, you know, obviously the vinyl has outpaced, the computers and cars are gone. And what's the future? And my question was, what would you tell an artist right now? Should you make CDs or not? Is it, what's the
I think that's still a tough question to answer. I did not look at those who didn't purchase CDs. So there's the whole other side of the spectrum would be to talk to young adults who aren't purchasing CDs and find out why are they not doing so. I left that in my future directions section of this paper and saying, look, you know, that is the whole other side to the spectrum here. For those who are interested in it, I would say that maybe, again, include some of the things that people want to buy CDs for. Have a booklet, you know, with artwork and, you know, maybe a fold-out poster. Maybe have some kind of limited edition items, too, to really help spur the sales of CDs, saying, you know, only if you get the CD will you get these bonus tracks. Only if you get the CD will you be able to get this limited edition poster or something of that nature. At least that might help to perhaps generate some sales or at least generate some interest, if anything. I think these are some of the, you know, some of the ways in which perhaps CDs could offset themselves from the other formats that are out there. But yeah, it is becoming tough. One of the discussions, you know, that the students were talking about, and these, you know, young adults were discussing as well, is that yes, they do use them in their cars. But for those who said they did not foresee using CDs in the future, and we did have a small percentage that did say, yes, I don't foresee myself purchasing new CDs in the future. One of the reasons why is I'm going to be buying a new car. And because I'm going to be buying a new car, my old car will then go with the CD player, and probably my new car won't have a CD player. Now, I just purchased a new car in 2019. And I sat in there and I said, oh, wait, there's no CD player in here. So new cars have, you know, slowly been eliminating CDs as standard equipment, CD players, that is, standard equipment. So with that being said, for those who do play CDs in their cars, either when their car stereo breaks or when their car breaks or when they intend to purchase a new car, then oftentimes out goes their ability to play CDs. So I think there's that connection as well that we have to consider.
There was a quick addition to that question also, in terms of genres. If you could just throw in, did you see any genre differences?
You know, I did look at genres. Probably the most popular genres that were used as far as CDs are concerned was pop. I think that was, number one when it came to that. There were a few other genres that were quite popular, including rock, hip hop as well. So I think typically the genres that you would think of that are popular out there were the ones that kind of were connected to CD sales. I did not really kind of connect that all that thoroughly though. So I just asked them, what are some of these genres that you are, purchasing on CD? And again, most of those were pop, rock, hip hop were the top three, R&B, soundtracks as well. Classical and Latin had a few in there too. So when we look at those elements, I did not necessarily make connections to maybe the amount of usage that they are using on CD with those genres, but that would be perhaps a good connection for a future study at that point.
Great. Thank you so much for it's really interesting research, especially in light of the times right now. I wanted to ask, Monika, do we have any general questions for any of our presenters? If not, I certainly have a couple more I can throw out there.
No general ones. Let's see if we can get a few for everybody. What do you have?
Sure. I actually did have a couple of other questions on my list. I wanted to head back actually to Dr. Bryant and Dr. Holt. I was wondering if you thought, I know you chose Nashville and Memphis for your study. Do you think there are any other areas in the country that you might think be worth examining?
You go ahead.
So I think that there may be. I think the project started looking at sort of just a natural, so this was back when I was still at Belmont. We were in Nashville. Given Eric's line of business, it was really interesting to take something that we know. And so when we were trying to find a comparator city, Memphis worked well. Actually, over the course of the summer, as we started collecting data, initially there wasn't a lot of data showing up in the larger tours that we were finding for Memphis. So we actually had picked a third city to include, which is St. Louis. And so that's probably going to get rolled into another follow-on, is because its makeup was a little different. So all three cities are within about the same region of the United States. They're very close in location. Like St. Louis is about a 4-hour drive to either Memphis or Nashville. All three cities have a history of music. Like they're known for some type of music, whether that's country or blues. And so you start to see some different dynamics in terms of, they've got some similarities there, but their racial makeups are different. So Nashville and Memphis are almost like the mirror images of each other in terms of the percentage of African-American citizenship versus white or Caucasian citizens in the city. And then St. Louis is somewhere in between, right? And so for this purposes, like we're going to focus on the Nashville-Memphis comparator to begin with, roll in that St. Louis. But I think this is something that could easily be looked at in other areas. If you start to think of other music centers, if we go not too much further from Nashville and think about Atlanta, if you stay in that southeastern kind of region and think about picking up New Orleans, if you really want to shift this to a jazz perspective. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here depending on what kinds of genres or focus. Eric, did you have something you wanted to add there?
Yes. And the reason the race component is important is because this shift in consumption has a lot to do with more white people listening to Black music at a higher level. And so looking at Memphis 10 years ago, 15 years ago, looking at Nashville 10 years, 15 years ago, you see this cross of more shows, larger Black shows, urban shows played in Nashville over time. And you see this actually increasing and again, I've been in the business for about 20 years as a concert promoter. So shows that would play in Memphis, a large, hip hop shows or rap shows or R&B shows that were Black, a lot of times would skip the Nashville market. And so St. Louis was kind of in the middle. They would get a mix, a hodgepodge early on. But as you move closer to 2018, 2019, you start seeing the same shows in all the markets. And again, it goes towards the consumption side of Black music.
Mm. Thank you so much. We are, this has all been fascinating. I could just sit here and talk with you all for another couple of hours. We are unfortunately just about out of time. I want to thank all of our presenters for showing up, all of our viewers. This has been a wonderful Q&A. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to Monika for assisting. And I would love to encourage all of our viewers right now to stick around. In 5 minutes, we've got a panel on perspectives on social justice in the industry, and we'd love to see you there. So thank you all for tuning in.